Justin Baldoni's team has issued a response in opposition to dismiss the New York Times.
How the New York Times actively vouched for the veracity of its false narrative.
We actually want all evidence to come out that's proper and appropriate evidence.
Blake Lively's attorney just walked away after Brian Friedman dropped a big update in their lawsuit. Honestly, I'm not shocked. From the start, it looked like Meryl Conant was in over her head, trying to defend a case built on nothing but illusions. Let's face it, you'd need a real magician to pull that off.
So we kind of knew this was coming, didn't we? The collusion argument.
Bailing out was probably her best bet to keep her reputation from going down with that sinking ship.
I looked through every document, every email, every text message.
And with this news, Blake Lively's legal team is officially a mess. Honestly, it was only a matter of time. And let's be real, even Blake can't blame her for quitting.
You guys were complicit here. You guys were involved in this every step of the way.
Trying to hold up a case that's crumbling without any real evidence for Blake's claims is like dousing a fire with fuel. The second Brian Friedman revealed his bombshell update, it was obvious the lawsuit was in a nosedive.
That's the whole point of a lawsuit, is you just start with allegations, and allegations are not evidence. They're just statements of fact that help establish this is the claim that I'm bringing.
In the beginning, Blake's side seemed promising. Sexual harassment, body shaming, breastfeeding accusations, all the perfect boxes to check for public sympathy. But the truth? There's not a sliver of proof supporting any of it.
Look, there's a lot of factual determinations that need to be made here, not legal determinations. And because there's factual determinations, you got to leave it to the jury. You got to give a jury the property.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're just saying, look, just let the facts decide. And the trier of fact in any case is going to be the jury. Unless it's a bench trial, then it's a judge. But this is not. This is a jury trial.
Once Justin Baldoni's team got digging, Blake's allegations started to look like a second-rate script. No messages, no files, nothing to show she wasn't inventing stories. Every time Blake's lawyers thought they had something to stand on, it turned into quicksand.
There's some bad things that happen here.
Here's the twist. Blake's PR crew played a big part in this too. They might have acted like they were all about justice, but really it was about saving face. They kept pushing Conant and her team to keep swinging, despite having zero evidence for Blake's claims.
They hired, meaning the Wayfair parties, hired a crisis PR manager who orchestrated a smear campaign against Lively.
Maybe they figured a slick PR strategy could land a win. But let's be honest, a courtroom doesn't care how many social media posts you make. Facts are what matter.
It wouldn't surprise me if that's what we see, but I do have to say that the arguments in this opposition were really good.
And if that wasn't enough, Conant was dealing with an insane amount of pressure. She's defending Blake, a high-profile client who wants a win at any cost, even when there's no substance behind her claims.
Reynolds and Lively wanted Wayfair to issue a statement taking the blame for Lively's bad press.
Then came the 170-page legal bombshell from Baldoni's side.
Baldoni's team drops a massive $400 million suit on Blake and a lawsuit against the New York Times. Then they publish 170 pages of perfectly documented texts and emails between all the parties that basically show Blake to be the aggressor. Here's the proof.
That release didn't just knock holes in Blake's case. It tore it apart. Alleged sexual harassment? Didn't hold up. Body shaming? Totally off the mark.
Yeah, and again, at the same time, Nathan assembled a team that could dominate social media through full social account takedowns by starting threads of theories and...
Hold that thought.
Here we go. Generally working to change the narrative. So it's impossible to know how much they planted and how much of it originated organically. Well, wait a minute.
Basically, everything Blake brought to the table got dismantled piece by piece. As the case wore on, it started looking like Blake was playing victim. No proof, just a laundry list of claims. And the harder Conant fought, the more she realized she had nothing to defend.
You're making a factual assertion that these people did something, seizing on it and amplifying it.
You might wonder, if that was the situation, why didn't she see it coming from the jump? Well, maybe you remember when the New York Times, yes, the media giant, gave Blake's case its stamp of approval. Back then, it probably felt like a guaranteed win.
This suit against the New York Times is hard.
Blake's team likely thought they'd hit pay dirt when the Times ran an article and video in December 2024, making her accusations seem untouchable.
Here is the clip in question. Now, this video
filed on Friday.
Thank you to
Private
Citizen
text
Journalist
messages.
for putting it on easily accessible. This was part of the article.
The sweet promise of mainstream news backing. For a brief moment, Blake had what seemed like the ultimate show of support. The piece, titled, "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine," acted like a golden ticket, a final PR boost to make her story against Justin Baldoni and Wayfair Studios look as solid as a judge's ruling.
A campaign to tarnish Lively after she alleged that Justin Baldoni, her co-star and director, and Jamie Heath, the producer, had engaged in misconduct while shooting the film.
Because let's face it, if the Times, an outlet that's been shaping history for decades, puts its seal on something, it must be legit, right?
And that's what the New York Times is coming back and saying, look, we're not Blake Lively. We're not the ones making the allegation. We're just fairly reporting on what Blake is suing Justin and Wayfair for.
But like most things that seem too perfect, reality came crashing down harder than Blake's team expected. Right when they thought the Times had their back, Justin Baldoni's legal bulldozer, Brian Friedman, answered with a counterstrike that would knock anyone flat. He immediately filed a motion to kick the New York Times out of the case, and honestly, it was a masterclass in legal takedowns.
They decided not to run it for fear of defamation, I'm sure, for fear of you in defamation. So they didn't run it, but some of these TikTokers have done it.
In Friedman's view, the Times wasn't merely reporting on Blake's accusations. They were presenting them as if they'd been confirmed, so you couldn't tell where journalism ended and editorializing began. According to Friedman, they weren't just acting as reporters, they were acting like cheerleaders.
He mocked Baldoni in the process. He said it's an effed up bad situation with what Baldoni, whatever his name is doing.
He didn't just call them biased either. He accused them of breaking the fair report privilege, which shields the press when covering legal matters. You know, the rule that keeps news outlets from getting yanked into every lawsuit they talk about.
If they would have said, Blake alleges that, or according to Blake, blah, 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 this happened, they'd be protected. But they said, and her title is investigative journalist. So she's investigative journalist for the New York Times. So that is implying that she's done an investigation. She's actually looked in this. We can trust her.
But here's the biggie. Friedman says the Times didn't just cover Lively's claims. They spun them as fact. They weren't just saying, Blake claims this happened. They implied it was all verified. That's not reporting. That's steering the story.
The New York Times have looked into it, and this is what really happened. So now they're stating as a fact, not as an opinion, that this happened, and that's how they're going to get into trouble.
Because of that, the Times lost the legal protection they'd normally have. In other words, they opened the door to getting sued. Brilliant move, right? Friedman's legal challenge was explosive in its own right. He argued that the Times wasn't just sloppy. They were complicit in trashing the Wayfair party's reputations.
It admittedly based its article and video on its reporter's review of thousands of pages of documents and expressly credited Lively's claims, framing them as having been verified by the New York Times' own investigation.
They made it sound like Blake's story was fully vetted and undeniably true. Legally, that's a big problem, since you can't present unverified claims as cold, hard facts. It's one thing to say, so-and-so alleges this. It's another to announce, this is exactly what happened, especially if you skipped the fact-checking. The difference between journalism and advocacy got blurry, and Friedman was ready to pounce. And it gets better. The timing of that article and video was also fishy, not just the way they framed it. Friedman pointed out that the Times dropped the piece during the holidays, leaving the Wayfair party almost no breathing room to respond. It was like they picked the ideal moment for maximum shock value. That timing synced perfectly with Blake's PR plan. According to Friedman, this wasn't just bad reporting, it was a move made in bad faith. The Times, it seemed, had already chosen a narrative long before hearing from the other side. Finding out the story was basically wrapped up days before the Wayfair parties were even approached? Yeah, That's a terrible look. It made the Times seem uninterested in actual facts. They just wanted a juicy storyline. Fredman didn't limit his complaints to timing. He took aim at the whole moral compass behind the Times piece. It wasn't just inconvenient scheduling or rushed editing. The media outlet had already picked a side. They didn't stop at showing Blake's claims. They went all in, giving little space for any competing account. It wasn't balanced coverage. It was a one-sided shout-out, dressed up as journalism. In Fredman's eyes, that crossed a serious line. For Blake Lively, what seemed like an amazing way to boost her case with help from the Times started feeling like a trap. She and her team probably never imagined that the support of a media powerhouse could backfire this badly. Instead of helping her, it handed Baldoni's lawyers the perfect angle to question the legitimacy of the entire media blitz. Fredman didn't just refute Blake's claims. He hammered the media for amplifying those claims without proper fact-checking. Now, rather than coasting on the Times coverage, Blake's team is stuck battling over news ethics, too. And if you thought we'd reached peak drama, think again. Brian Fredman, Justin Baldoni's attorney, came armed to the teeth with legal strategies. In this never-ending Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, Wayfair saga, the fight over jurisdiction is taking center stage. Yep, you read that right. Jurisdiction. It's the legal tug-of-war that might shape the entire case. And heads up, it's a big deal. It's not just about which court is used. It's about where reputations are defended and where defamation charges could really sting. Fredman's plan? California. He's making it clear. This lawsuit belongs in Hollywood's backyard, not New York. Fredman's logic is pretty straightforward. California's defamation laws pack more protection, and that's exactly what he's chasing. California is home for Baldoni and the Wayfair parties, and it's where their reputations are on the line. Let's be honest, California is the heart of the entertainment world. A blow to someone's image lands harder here than anywhere else. You'd think that alone explains why California should claim this case. The Wayfair team's careers took a direct hit in California, and Fredman doesn't hold back on pointing that out. Sure, the Times fanned the media flames, but the actual damage occurred where these people work and live. Plus, California defamation laws can award heftier damages, and Fredman knows how to use that. He's not just aiming to win. He wants to make a point, and there's no better place than California to do so. But here's the real jaw-dropper. Fredman's not just fighting over where the case belongs. He's also slamming the Times for playing it loose with the truth. While they were busy having a festive holiday publishing this bombshell, Fredman was sitting there asking why they rushed it out without letting the Wayfair side respond properly. By Fredman's account, the Wayfair crew had only a few hours to fight back before the Times pushed the story live. Classic tactic, right? Drop the bomb, give the other side no chance to recover. And doing it around Christmas? Couldn't have been more convenient. Fredman contends this wasn't just sloppy journalism. It was a purposeful rush to release the story without confirming details. That's a clear sign of reporting in bad faith. There's more. Fredman's ready to accuse the Times of something far more serious. Actual malice. Under American defamation law, proving actual malice means showing the defendant, here, the Times, knew the info was false or just didn't care if it was true. And Fredman feels he has a strong case. He says the Times had enough inside data and communications to know Blake's claims were shaky at best. But instead of digging deeper, they went with the angle they wanted. They never bothered to verify. They just dropped a sensational headline. This is where Fredman says the Times didn't just mess up accidentally, but deliberately. That's not a small mistake. It's malicious intent. And he's not alone in thinking so. His lawsuit aims to hold the giant publication accountable for what he calls reckless and possibly damaging reporting. He also notes the Times never really gave the Wayfair side a fair shot to answer these serious allegations. It wasn't only about rushing things. The Times was actively shaping the story without factoring in all the details. The Wayfair group barely had time to present their version before the piece hit everyone's feeds. Fredman says that's a blatant breach of fair reporting. The Times made it look like Blake's claims were ironclad facts, but in reality, they were unverified allegations. And the Times didn't do the legwork to confirm them. Fredman's core issue is journalistic ethics. Was the Times truly after the facts, or did they just want a hot story? He's convinced it's the latter. The Times treated Blake's accusations like gospel, giving them the weight of absolute truth. But they didn't bother with real investigative work. No fact-checking. They just ran it. And that, Fredman argues, is where they crossed the line. Then there's Lady C, a big personality who's never shy about calling out celebrity games with the media. She's tearing into Blake Lively and the Times on social platforms, claiming this whole thing is a well-orchestrated PR plot to bury Baldoni's career. And she's not pulling punches. Lady C insists the Times, by supporting Blake's angle, became an accidental player in this smear job. That's a huge accusation. She's basically saying the Times ignored basic journalism standards and turned into another gear in Blake's PR machine. And honestly, her words have impact. She's not the only one speaking up. The sheer power of stardom in steering the media has never been clearer. The media's obligation to stay neutral and unbiased is always a fine line, especially with A-listers like Blake and Ryan. But this situation proves just how quickly that line can get crossed. Lively's PR folks obviously know how to manipulate the press, but if you ask Fredman, the Times just went along for the ride. They never paused to say, "Hey, are we hearing both sides?" Instead, they chased the sensational, presenting Blake's accusations as solid truth. According to Fredman, that crushed the Wayfair party's reputations. The big question left is how big a role the media should play in cases like this. Are they the judge and jury, or should they stick to just reporting facts? Now, let's talk about the real courtroom spectacle, because things are about to get wild. Fredman insists this case has to go before a judge. He believes the media needs to answer for what they've done, and he wants an actual jury to decide if the Times was reckless in publishing its report. From his perspective, it's the court's job, not the media's, to figure out the truth. Nobody wants the public deciding the outcome based on clickbait and Twitter threads. Fredman's pushing for a trial where both sides can show their cards to a jury. And honestly, with all these twists, this story begs for a courtroom showdown. Public opinion can be a monster, especially in celebrity drama. That's why Fredman is so set on a jury, not the press, making the call. A trial puts the legal system in control, rather than the tabloids and social platforms. If it goes to trial, a group of everyday folks, not polished PR teams or flashy headlines, will decide these reputations. And let's be real, Blake Lively's legal squad is feeling the heat. Each week, more details leak showing just how shaky her position is. Baldoni's 170-page release paints a picture of a conflict that's bigger than a legal scuffle. It's a fight to protect someone's name. Her lawyer, Meryl Conant, already walked off the job once she realized there was no solid ground. As more info trickles out, people's opinions on Blake's claims are shifting. If Fredman gets his day in court and proves her accusations were built on nothing, Blake's once rock-solid reputation could fall apart faster than you can say media spin. Looking ahead, this is clearly more than a standard lawsuit. It's a collision of free press, star power, and reporting ethics. Whether Blake manages to save face or the truth finally shines through, one thing's certain. The impact of this showdown will be felt way beyond Tinseltown. And that's the end of it for now. Stay tuned for more plot twists and legal fireworks.